Sergej Prokofiew's Wojna i Mir, War and Peace, Krieg und Frieden at the Bavarian State Opera, a monumental undertaking even for such a large house as this and even for such an experienced team like this. I welcome very warmly Generalmusikdirektor Vladimir Jurowski and stage director Dmitri Tcherniakov. In opera, you have to plan long ahead. When the Bayerische Staatsoper put Krieg und Frieden, Wojna i Mir on the program of this year, 2023, no one suspected that war coming from Russia could happen in Europe. Dmitri, after the 24th of February, you wanted to give back the production. Why?
The first impulse was quite, how supposed to say, I decided to give up because I didn't know how it's possible to interpret this title today.
And when did you change your mind?
It's not happened in 1 second, you know, because I tried to discuss with people around what the option we can choose for interpretation in new situation. And I wanted to ask many people, friends of mine, even people who is so far from opera world, just to get a lot of information, how they will absorb this story, this topic today. And I explained once to Vladimir, it's not that idea how we will be able to stage this title today. It came to me spontaneously, you know, like some kind of, you know, vision. It was not calculated. It was not planned. It was not. It's happened not by analysis. It's happened by some kind of, how to say.
An inner voice. You have to do it?
Yes, and I start to see this piece today in these circumstances today, and I immediately registrate maybe it will make sense. And then I start to be more brave. But first weeks, maybe at least 1 month and a half, I was quite depressive because it's difficult to stage something if we are not sure about what we are doing and what we have to say audience, because all our job, all production, all, you know, all performances, what we are doing, it's statements. Nevertheless, it's not possible just to tell stories. You know, we are not storytellers. We have to say something important. Otherwise, it will not make sense.
To find truth.
Yeah.
Vladimir, how close were you to cancel the whole thing? And why did you change your mind?
Well, I was the one in the beginning who said we have to do it, despite all. I was the one who was pushing first to do the piece, because that was in the first month after the start of the war, and that was also where the first cancellations of Russian titles started happening around, and when first Russian artists started being cancelled, their contracts being cancelled, their concerts being cancelled last moment. And for me, and I remembered I said it to Sergej, we have to take Prokofjew into our defense. We have to defend him. But the more the war kept progressing and the more pictures of horror we saw from various Ukrainian cities like Irpin, Bucha, Izum, etc., the less I got convinced of my own idea. Not because I suddenly thought, no, you're right, let's punish the Russian art. No, but because I realized that some artists, and Prokofjew does belong to this circle, who desperately wanted to stay outside the politics, that was his main conviction, in fact contributed to the politics of horror, to the Stalinism, by creating those great works of art, which became some kind of a justification of the Stalinism. You can compare it to the role which Richard Strauss played in the Nazi Germany. And although no one would ever say Richard Strauss was a Nazi. He was not. But with his apolitical position, he inadvertently approved of the regime. Already the fact that he did not ban the performance of his opera Die Schweigsame Frau after the exile of Stefan Zweig, of his collaborator, speaks for it. And Prokofjew is exactly the same. Prokofjew could have said, if I'm not allowed to produce War and Peace the way I want it, then let's cancel it altogether. What Prokofjew did, he tried to please the authorities. He invented new scenes, and he changed the libretto where the original text of Tolstoy has been replaced by slogans from Stalinist propaganda.
We should call it propaganda, you would say.
I think it is propaganda, but it is propaganda which is partially based on the historical events of 1812. The thing is that already Tolstoy describes the events of that Russian-French war in a slightly amended, slightly varied form from the actual historic reality. It's not that he falsifies the reality, but for instance, the way Tolstoy describes Marshal Kutuzov
is anti-heroic, and in the opera we see a hero.
Yeah, wait, but still, he describes him anti-heroically, but he still describes him as the person who won this war. The modern historians think even this was a fake. The thing is that the 1812 campaign has been manipulated both by French and by Russian historians already in the 19th century. And the whole topic of the great patriotic war was developed later. People didn't see it very much as a great patriotic war at the time. So Prokofiev's fake news, if you want, come already on top of the fundament which has been created in Russia over many decades. And it was fitting because Russia was in the state of war with Germany. Russia was not in the position of the aggressor. Russia was the suffering side. And Russian people needed extra support, which Prokofjew gave them by creating some fairy tales on stage. And basically this War and Peace is, especially the second part of it, the war, is a fairy tale for adults. It has absolutely nothing to do with reality, neither with the reality of Tolstoy's novel, nor with reality, even less with the reality of 1812.
And how can we show this piece, this problematic piece, this complicated piece, with a very special interpretation of the Tolstoy novel in this year, under these circumstances? What is your approach?
Well, this is what I was trying to aim at, is going deeper and deeper into Prokofjew. At first, I felt, like Dmitri before, the total impossibility of engaging with the subject matter, because what I remembered in March 22, when I was defending the piece, was the music. I knew the piece before, I have conducted it before. I remembered how beautiful the music was. What I did not remember is how horrible the parts of text of it.
The second part.
The second part. So, nearly a Stalinistic epitaph for choir.
And you mean the epigraph?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, although part of this epigraph is drawn from the original Tolstoy text.
Yes, but he took the words, but he put it in another context.
In a different context. You're right. And the first thing we decided, but the initiative came from me, said we have to drastically shorten it. Yeah. That was the first, but that was before I knew Dmitri's concept. After I knew it, I told him, actually, we could have done without shortening a single word, because the way he tells this story makes all the weaknesses of this piece become its strengths. I would even say the piece has been waiting for this interpretation since the day of its creation. Because unlike Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony, War and Peace has never been played during the wartime. It was composed during the wartime, but when it was performed, it was post-war. Yeah. And so the whole thing became more and more propagandistic, while the Shostakovich Symphony, you can blame it of many things, but you cannot blame it of being a piece of propaganda. No. It's something which is giving people hope. So in my opinion, now playing War and Peace at war, where the Russia is not the suffering side, but the aggressor, turns the weaker part, the problematic part of this piece, into the main topic. It's not Tolstoy's War and Peace, it's Prokofiev's War and Peace. Sure. It's not a story about 1812. It's not even a story about 1941. It's a story about Russia in through the prism of centuries. Yeah. And seeing it from today, we can see where the root of evil was.
Talk about the way you show this problematic piece. And I think that in Tcherniakov stage productions, the scenery has a very special importance and relevance. Where do you show this piece, War and Peace?
Oh, I would like to repeat what Vladimir said, because he said not literally, but because we have a very tight agreements working together. And I have to say, really, it's not just compliment, it's one of the most tight relationship between music and stage what I had in my life. You know, because I'm very happy for that, because if we went to different directions, it will be difficult to survive with this piece today. And what should I say? It's not connected with 1812. It's not connected with 40s of 20th century. But I would like to say it's not literally connected with 2022 or 23. Because it should be more global, more paradigmatic, you know, about life of society in very special circumstances. Why we decide to put all our heroes together with chorus, all of characters of this piece in one locked, isolated space. From the beginning till the end, we will analyze what's going on with society. From the beginning till the end, it will be very different and very, how supposed to say, surprising changing of this psychology of this society. Of course, audience will be able to read differently. What is it, this society? It's just a special case, or it's just global, like picture of, you know, of nature. You know, it could be many different way of reading. And I think it's good if it will be like this, because I don't want to be so, you know, so direct and so placative, because sometimes it starts to be very flat if we are doing very, you know, very poof. But of course, inside we have to say many bitter, tragical, and dramatical things about what is it, life of this society, let's say like this, today. What is it? Because in the beginning, all our characters will be, let's say, victims of tragical situation in the beginning. And then we will see how mind of these people, when they're sitting and living together, isolated in locked space, how that mind of these people start to drive to very special direction, a very dangerous tendency. You know, and what start to be in the mind of these people, and how menacing start to be mind of these people, and we will see how it's supposed to happen if we will. I don't want to give audience some kind of, you know, verdict or summary. It's just observing. I don't have a recipes what we have to do, you know, why it's happened like this, but. It's important just for art, how I can feel it, just to observe this process, observe sometimes from outside, sometimes from a little bit inside, because we will be together with characters most of the time. And but process of observing of life of this society, it's very sad process. You know, we will have very sad emotions, very sad feelings about that, and I have to say quite pessimistic. I try to avoid. You know, maybe you notice how I try to answer on your question, but not to explain my production details.
Yeah. Maybe we can take this detail that you.
I will tell something.
Okay.
Yes, and but basic image of this production. It's big hall. It was built in end of 18th century in Moscow. It exists now. All Russians, let's say, all people who was born and grew up in Soviet time, in modern Russians, you know, they know this place because that place is connected with very important
funeral ceremonies of
for
Lenin
example,
and Stalin and the Composer
but it was
Congress.
very famous place even in 18th and 19th century because
fashion shows.
Yeah, it's today. It's multitask place, but now it belongs to Russian parliament. And you know, this building, it's one of just few buildings. It survived
the fire.
Yes, in the fire in Moscow in 1812. It was a lot of very special events, you know, even in 19th century, a lot of balls. It's a lot of, you know, anniversary of Tsar and family, you know, 300 years of Romanova dynasty, for example. It was huge reception. Also, funeral ceremonials of all Russian, all Soviet leaders from Lenin in 1924. And very famous, let's say famous, because everybody knows about that funeral of Stalin. And you know, it's strange connection, but maybe a lot of people knows about that. Stalin died in the same day like Prokofjew.
Yeah, tragically.
And apartment of Prokofjew, flat of Prokofjew, it was 100 meters from this building.
From this place.
Yeah, and also, I like one picture. I try to distribute between all singers that picture. It's a very famous picture. Prokofjew and his wife, Mira Mendelssohn, who is author of libretto, of text of the opera.
And responsible for the patriotic tendencies.
Let's say like this, yes. And they're sitting together in the first symposium of Russian Soviet composers in 1948. It was huge attacking against of the main names of Soviet composer, Prokofjew, Shostakovich, etc. I think, I don't know exactly, maybe Vladimir will correct me, maybe it was huge stress, huge hit to Prokofiev's life. After that, maybe he got a stroke, first stroke, right? Or maybe a little before. But it was 5 years before his death. And 5th of March 1953, it is the day of death of Prokofjew and the day of death of Stalin. And we have an opening night also in the same day, 5th of March, but 70 years after.
What kind of people do you show in this room, in this place? It's a place where Vladimir, I read about that, heard the first time the Fifth Symphony of Prokofjew, conducted by your father. So we have
Colonne-Saal? I don't know how it's possible to pronounce this. Colonne-Saal, column hall, you know?
Great
column hall.
Säulenhalle. Säulenhalle. So which are the people we see there, the Russian people?
You know, of course we are talking about Russians. All people who will be locked, let's say like this, in this column hall from the beginning till the end in our production, of course it's Russians. But I would like to look at the situation a little bit more wider because...
kind of refugees?
No, I don't want to say like this. let's say, refugees, even in opera stage, today it's a little bit fashion topic, you know. Everybody tried to talk about that.
Yeah.
Little bit cliche. I try to avoid this connotation with refugees, because refugees, it's people who is escaping, who is moving from place to place. And in our situation, it's a little bit, we are trying to build a little bit anti-utopia. It's not completely realistic, you know. All these circumstances a little bit invented, you know. We try to imagine how people, that people were isolated in this space. Why? What's the reason? It's a little bit tragic circumstances for people, and maybe in the beginning, I guess in the beginning, not everyone in the audience will understand very precise what's happened around, but we understand war, its main topic, main background behind of the story, even in first part, when we are talking about private lines, about peace. But war, all the time, it's very important, how to say, important layers. Important subtext behind of everything.
It's fascinating in Tolstoy and also in Prokofjew how they manage to this transition from war as a theme of discussions, parlando in the salon, and then it becomes something real and cruel, the reality. It's a kind of shock. Do we learn something in this opera about or in your stage production, about the development of, let's say, militarization, that from one moment to another person is not my friend. I'm going to attack another person. This is what we see, that people are changing their attitude toward each other. And this is something I see in Tolstoy and Prokofjew. Is this something that makes this opera in these days so important?
Difficult to answer so precise, because, you know, one thing it's historical. It's true what's happened, you know, in the beginning of 18th century. Then Tolstoy interpretation, then Prokofiev's interpretation, then our interpretation, and then fifth layer, what will be in the mind of the people, you know, how they will read it.
I think the translation War and Peace is a little bit one-sided. Krieg und Frieden is not everything which is meant in Tolstoy's title. When he first wrote the manuscript of the novel, the word mir was written with the Latin I, E, which at the time in the 19th century was one of the two possible spellings of the word. The other spelling is with the Cyrillic I, and that's the one common today, the only one common today. In those days, mir spelled with the Cyrillic I meant peace, which is absence of war. But mir with the Latin I meant the world, society, community. Yeah. So I would say that in this production of 2023, we are discussing much more the topic of war versus society of people, rather than the juxtaposition of war and peace.
How is the private and the political, these two layers, connected in your show?
I would like not to split this production of this piece for private and for political, okay. Because difficult to say political. It's political. It's something temporary. It's something something. We need a little bit more global point of view. Global. It's more paradigmatic. It's not about situation just today. Situation in 1940s. You know, we try to say something more global. It's important to find some kind of to show some kind of mechanism of life of this society, without judging, just observing, and observing bring big sadness to our souls. But I think all private stories should be connected with main global main global image. We will not split. This is just important for two, for one, or for family.
Yeah, understood. But do we learn something about the mechanism you're talking about? These mechanisms.
You know, to learn it, maybe it's wrong word, because how I understood, nobody in our civilization, we don't have any lessons, because many situations repeated and repeated. Without horrible experience, after many years, it starts to be again. You know, and I have a feeling like experience never teach us, you know, and I don't want to make lessons, because I don't have a right to do it, you know. I'm also someone who is making mistake, and I'm also weak, and I like all of us, we are human. We just want to say something about our emotions about that, how we notice this, and how it's make us very sad. But teaching, I think it's too ambitious, you know.
Observing.
Maybe it's not task for the art, you know.
Maybe
I'm wrong, you know.
What can you say us to describe the special quality of the music? Why is the music worth doing this?
For me, the score of the War and Peace belongs to the finest pages of Prokofjew music of the last, let's say, 20 years of his life. So basically, since his return to Russia at the end of 1930s, he wrote huge amount of pieces, and not all of them are of the same high quality. I mean, I would point out the late piano sonatas, 6, 7, 8, and 9. The so-called war sonatas, though 9 is not really a war sonata, this is his testament, it's his farewell to life. The two penultimate symphonies, 5 and 6, but particularly 6, for me at least. The cello symphony concerto, the flute sonata, which became also the violin sonata number 2, but also the violin sonata written in 1938, the tragic sonata, where Prokofjew described one passage of it to David Oistrakh as the wind blowing across the cemetery. I'm naming all these works because you will find allusions to all these works in War and Peace. And of course the two ballets, the two great ballets, Romeo and Juliet and Cinderella. The music is often better than the underlying text, and the music is sometimes good in an abstract instrumental sense, not necessarily in a theatrical sense. You have to invent theater around it. Prokofjew was a genius inventor of music. He was a genius ballet composer, I think. He was not necessarily a genius opera composer. Genius opera composer, for me, is someone who creates music theater through the combination of text and music. And that was something which was not granted to Prokofjew. All of his operas, even the best of them, such as Love for Three Oranges or Fiery Angel, they suffer from some minor or major deficiencies. And they are not of musical kind, they are of dramatical kind.
Yeah, although we see a very precise sense of declamation. He composes a prosa text, and each character is wrapped in a kind of costume of his own, which makes a special color and quality.
Yeah. I'm not disputing that. I'm not trying to criticize him as a composer. And where he's at his best is in connection between music and filmic images. He was a fantastic film composer. He basically, along with Korngold and others in the West, he invented the modern film music. And that's my point. War and Peace, at its best, is a filmic opera. It's an opera created for a camera. The only problem with cameras is that cameras can show either close-up or a wide angle. But in our production, it's close-up and wide angle simultaneously.
More or less at the same time, yeah.
Yeah. And that for me is the biggest merit and biggest achievement of this production, that the microscopically small human feelings and those huge political events are permanently observed by the spectator. And music creates a perfect soundtrack.
We talk about a masterpiece, the great Russian opera of the 20th century.
It's a great torso of a piece. You know, the piece was never finished.
We have 4 versions.
Yeah, and even the version which was published after Prokofiev's death, which represents his last thoughts on the piece, was not the final. So it's a torso.
And you have the chance to model this torso. In which way do you do it? What is it we don't will see and hear?
What you want here is the scene number 10, one of the later edit scenes with Kutuzov's generals and the council of Kutuzov in Fili and Kutuzov's famous aria. What you want here is the big finale, very Hollywood-like operatic finale with the melody of Kutuzov's aria. We have opted for the first version of the finale, the one which Prokofjew discarded himself, but which we found much more fitting because it includes a military banda, a 24-piece military orchestra which comes on stage and plays on the stage. There is no such huge banda.
Great people choir.
Not instead, I would say, in addition to.
In addition to.
In addition to.
What will be the last words we will hear?
I think it's the words of Kutuzov.
I think it will last. What we will see and we will hear from the stage will be not words. I think it will be something not verbal, but very, very important.
But the last pronounced sentence is the sentence
Kutuzov,
of Kutuzov, which proclaims that the Russia is now saved and that the enemy has been driven away from our soil.
But it will be so long time before the end, maybe at least 5 minutes.
And then came the banda, and the music has the last word.
The music has the last word.
One thing, how do you manage these immense efforts of 70 roles, characters? One can double some.
We have doubled and even tripled some, which is very much the tradition. And obviously, since we lost the 10th scene, the edit scene with the Russian generals, we lost also some characters. But it is definitely alongside with Les Troyens by Berlioz and The Nose by Shostakovich, one of the busiest productions ever to populate a stage of any theater. It involves almost warlike planning, strategical and tactical, so a day-to-day planning, but also planning weeks and weeks in advance. We also have taken more weeks for the staging of this opera than would usually. Usual opera staging takes 6 weeks, sometimes 7. This time we have 9 weeks. And believe me, it is necessary.
I think so. Back to the starting point of our discussion. We don't have to discuss here whether Russian art or artists should be excluded, cancelled, as long as we agree about some human basic questions of right and wrong. But there are Ukrainians who do not want to work with Russians now. Do you feel something of this sensitivity, and how do you deal with this? Do you have Ukrainians in the cast?
Yes. We're not feeling any of that in our production. I have to say it's been one of the happiest families in my experience. People from very, very many different nations. We've got Russians, we've got Ukrainians, we've got people
Moldavians,
from
Armenians, Lithuanians, former USSR. Almost.
Belarus,
yeah.
Uzbekistan, Tajikistan.
Exactly.
Estonia. We've got almost the whole ex-Soviet Union. We've got also one refugee from Donbass, a girl who is working as Dmitri's assistant, one of his assistants. The language in the rehearsal room is either Russian or German or English. But everyone who is working on this production is trying to help each other. We're not asking people of their political opinions. They're not asking us what we think about this and that. We are not discussing the war, but we're not feeling any hostility or fear among the members of this production. But I have come across situations, very recently again, where Ukrainian artists refused to work on the same stage with Russians, not with me, but with singers, soloists invited from Russia, those Russian passport holders, I would say. And we have to accept it.
And so you did it. Thank you, Dmitri. Thank you, Vladimir Jurowski. And here we are to continue with the second part of Wojna i Mir by Sergej Prokofjew in live stream from the Bayerische Staatsoper München. Thank you for listening and watching.